Welcome to ZAPCon, everyone. My name is Akshath Kothari, and I'll be talking about out-of-band application security testing with ZAP today. I've been a ZAP core team member since 2020. I wrote the GraphQL and the OAST add-ons as part of Google Summer of Code. I'm currently working as a founding engineer at Levo.ai, and my website is ricecode.com. With that out of the way, let's jump right into it. What does out of band mean anyway? Traditionally, how security testing is done with ZAP and other scanners is they send payloads to the target, and the responses that they receive back are analyzed. But there are many places where this model falls short. So, for example, it misses vulnerabilities that involve stored data, like stored cross-site scripting, or those that involve interactions with external systems like SSRF and Log4Shell, which was discovered recently. And it misses super blind vulnerabilities. For example, stored XSS vulnerabilities that affect admin-only pages enter out-of-band application security testing. So this is different from the traditional model in the sense that it involves sending payloads to the target that trick it into connecting with a second computer that's also connected by us or the attacker. So that's out-of-band security testing in a nutshell. But I'm not going to focus on out-of-band security testing, explaining what that is, because there are a ton of resources online, and I feel other people have explained it much better than me. The focus of this presentation is going to be the OAST add-on for ZAP. Before we talk about the OAST add-on for ZAP, you need to have it installed. So it's available on the marketplace, and you can go to the ZAP marketplace and install it from there. When you install the add-on, some elements are added to the ZAP GUI. One of them is the OAST tab. So the OAST tab is available in the bottom panel. You can click on the plus button and select OAST. And if you want, you can pin it if you use it frequently. That's how you get the OAST tab in the GUI. Once you have the OAST tab, let me explain all the components that are visible there. So let's begin with the indicators. So you can see two indicators here, which is Bose and Interact SH. So these are out-of-band services that are available with the add-on. The add-on is able to communicate with these services. We'll come back to these later. So we have a bunch of indicators for them. A gray indicator, a gray icon means it's inactive and it's not being polled. A green icon means that it's active and it's being polled. And the timestamp next to is the last time when it was polled. If it's an active scan service, there's going to be a small flame in the bottom right corner of the icon. I'll show you what that looks like in a few minutes. Other than that, if you look at the table, there's a bunch of columns here. The ID is just an internal representation of. It's just an ID that's assigned to each unique request that is received by the OAST handlers. So it's going to be different for every request. The request timestamp is when the request was received. The method is the kind of, it can either be a DNS request or it can be an HTTP request. So that's what the method column is for. And if you look at the underscore A, so that's the kind of DNS request that was sent. So the kind of DNS record that was requested for. The URL is the URL that was hit by the target. The handler is the service that received the interaction, and the source is the source of the request, and the referrer is the value of the referrer header. It's pretty straightforward. The names from the names themselves. And if you look above the table, there are two more buttons there. One is the clear button, which is to clear the panel, and a poll now button polls the active services and resets the time of next polling. So I'll come to that again in a while. So you would want to configure. Now let's look at how we can configure OAST. So you can go to the options window. From tools options, you can click on the gear icon, or you can use the shortcut Control Alt O. That will bring up the options window for you. And now we're going to look at all the available options and what they mean and how we can configure the various OAST services. So the OAST add-on currently supports interacting with the following services. ZAP callbacks, which are locally hosted and they are part of ZAP. So it's exposed on a different port, but it's part of ZAP itself. So yeah. And Bose and Interact SH are third-party open source services that you can host yourself. But there are also public instances available, so we can use those for testing. Other than these services, the OAST add-on was written in a way that makes it easy to add other services that you would wanted to interact with. So let's say if you want to interact with request bin from ZAP, you can do that too, but you'll need to have a client implementation within the add-on or outside the add-on, but you'll need to provide a client implementation for that. Let's look at the callback service first. So the callback service, as I mentioned, it's hosted by ZAP and it's on a port different than the proxy port. There's various options available here. We have the local and the remote addresses. So the local address is the address that the callback service binds to. The remote address is how computers on the network can access or interact with the callback service. So let's say you have your phone and your computer on the network. If you go to this IP address, the interaction will show up in ZAP. Secure is whether you want the service to be able to be accessed securely on HTTPS or without it. And the port is the port which it should be exposed on. Let's look at Interact SH now. So it's an open source self-hosted service. It's available on GitHub, and it has become quite popular in recent times. There are also free public instances available at Interact.sh and interactsh.com. So there's that. Let's look at the options for this service. We have the server URL. We have the authorization token. So if you're hosting it yourself, it's suggested to use an authorization token so other people cannot use your service as well. You don't want them to be using resources that you're paying for. The polling frequency is how frequently the service is polled for interactions. And the active payloads table lists the payloads that you can use in attacks. Bose is another open source service. It's also on GitHub. Unfortunately, it does not have a public instance right now. There used to be one, but it's offline for now. The configuration setting options for Bose are also pretty similar as Interact SH. So there's the server URI, and there's an option for setting the polling frequency. For both Bose and Interact SH, the minimum polling frequency can be 10 seconds and the maximum can be 6 hours, I think. It does not have an authorization token. So when you expose Boast, anyone can use your service. So there's that. That's Boast, Interact SH, and Callback Services. Now let's look at a quick demo where we are going to find out Discord bot's address. What's Discord bot? So have you ever wondered whenever you put a URL on applications like Slack, Discord, or Twitter, they show a neat thumbnail and like a summary of what you can find on that URL, a link preview. So how do they work? How are Slack and Discord able to find out what that URL looks like? So they have they basically crawl those URLs, and that's how they get information about what's available on that URL. And so if they're crawling that URL, what we are going to do is we're going to generate a payload, a URL, and we're going to paste that into Discord. So I have Discord on the left here, and I have Zap on the right. I'm going to generate payloads in Interact SH and paste that into Discord. So when I paste that into Discord, Discord tries to find out what's on that URL by sending it a request, a GET request. And when it sends it a GET request, that's captured by Interact SH, and it shows up in Zap. So, and we can see the request on the right in the table in the OAST tab. And if you look at the header of the GET request, we can see that the user agent contains Discord bot 2.0. You can try this with Slack as well. I think it should work there too, or with any other application that shows you link previews. Let's look at active scan rules now. We can use, so there are already a bunch of active scan rules in Zap that are making use of OAST payloads. So some of them are, all of them are log4shell, XML external entity attack, and the out-of-band XSS scan rule. So we're going to go into a bit of detail on how you can write your own active scan rules and use OAST payloads in them. Active scan rules can only make use of one OAST service at a time. The callback service is always active. It's always available for use by active scan rules because it's hosted locally by Zap. And you can pick one of the other OAST services, which means either Bose or Interact SH, to use in active scan rules. So whichever service you pick in the options menu of OAST, that the payloads from that service will be used in active scan rules. And if you notice here, once we select Interact SH, a small flame appears in the bottom right corner of the icon in the status bar of the OAST panel. Let's walk through the code of the XML external entity scan rule to understand how active scan rules can make use of OAST payloads. So every active scan rule in Zap contains a scan method, and here's the scan method in the XXC scan rule. Let's walk through the code. So we are creating a new HTTP message, and we are checking if the content type is XML or not. So the XXC scan rule only runs if the content type in the request header of the HTTP message contains XML. Otherwise, there's no point in injecting XML in requests that are not XML. So the thing that we are interested in are the two checks. So the first check is remote file inclusion attack. And the second call is to the method called out of band file inclusion attack. The remote file inclusion attack makes use of the callback service. And in any scan rule, in any anywhere that we want to use the OAST services, the first thing that we need to do is get the extension using the extension loader. So the first two lines under try is how you can get the extension OAST. And first and the thing that the method that you would how this works is, first we create an alert. We set the confidence, the message, the source, and everything that we want the alert to have. And we register that with the extension OAST. So we register the alert, and we also specify the class name. So class name will show up in the handler field that I showed you earlier. So I can go back to that. Whenever an attack that was made by XXC scan rule results in an out of band interaction, the request will show up in the OAST tab, and the handler name will be equal to XXC scan rule, which was the class name. So that's what you need to do. You need to get the extension, build the alert, and register the alert for the callback service with a name for the handler. And once you do that, this method returns the payload that you can use to inject in the requests that you make. So the scan rule makes. That's basically it. So it's pretty easy if you look at it. Once we have the payload, we insert that into the HTTP message and we send that message. That's the remote file inclusion attack. Then we have the out of band file inclusion attack, which was the second check here. We do the same thing here as well. We get the extension, we build an alert, and we register it. When we register the alert, we get a payload back, and we use that payload to construct malicious requests that we send to the target. And this is the out of band file inclusion attack. The payload that this method returns will be generated using the active scan service that you selected earlier. And that's all you have to do. When you send that request, and if that attack is successful, the service will keep getting polled in the background. And if that attack is successful, it will receive an interaction, and that interaction will show up in ZAP. And the alert object that you passed when you registered that alert with the extension will be raised. Let's look at a fun demo now. We're going to be using a newer version of ZAP to attack ZAP 2.11, which was vulnerable to Log4Shell. I have ZAP 2.11 in dark mode on the right here, and on the left, I have the logs. And then in light mode here, I have the ZAP dev build. What we're going to do is we're going to enter a URL of the ZAP API of ZAP 2.11 into the newer ZAP version, so that what we want to do is we want to get the vulnerable endpoint in ZAP 2.11 into the newer ZAP version. So that's all we're doing here. We enter the so ZAP 2.11 is running on port 8081, and I have a URL here. So it's the delete alert endpoint. If you look carefully, it has two query parameters, which are API key and ID. So the vulnerability here is that when we specify an incorrect API key, that is logged by ZAP, and that results in the log4shell vulnerability. So that's what we're going to do here. So once we enter the URL here and it's available in the sites tree, we're going to launch an attack on it. So if you look at the logs of when we added the, let me move my mouse out of the way. If you look at the logs here, it says API key incorrect or not supplied, 1 in request from 127.0.0.1. And that 1 is the API key. So if you look at the request here, it's API key equals 1. So that's all we're going to do. We're going to replace the 1 with a payload that we know will result in the log4shell vulnerability. And we paste the URL here. This URL we got from the OAST panel when we registered the Interact Asset Service. We get a new payload, and we use that payload to construct a malicious request that we send to the old ZAP version. So once we're building the request here, and once we send that request, we'll go back to the logs, and you can see that the payload indeed was logged, which results in the log4shell vulnerability. But how do we know that? When we poll the Interact Asset Service in ZAP, the interactions all show up there. So this is how we know that ZAP 2.11 is vulnerable to log4shell. But you don't have to worry about that now, because the version of ZAP that was released later, 2.11.1, fixed the log4shell bug. Then let's look at scripting with OAST. When you install the OAST add-on, some standalone scripts and script templates are already they're bundled with the add-on, and they're also installed when you install the add-on. So you can write new scripts based on the template that's provided. Let's look at scripting with OAST now. Some standalone scripts and script templates are bundled with the add-on. So when you install the add-on, they will also be available for you to use. Active scan scripts in ZAP are very similar to the active scan rules in Java. And that's because, and you can use all the APIs that we just discussed inside the scripts as well. So you can use the register, alert, and get payload method inside scripts as well. And that will allow you to do the same things that you can do in scan rules, in Java scan rules. If you look at the code snippet here, we're doing the same thing. We're getting the extension, and we're getting the Interact Asset Service from the extension. First, we check if the service is registered or not. And if it's not registered, we set the server URL, register it, and get a new payload. Here's another snippet of registering an OAST request handler. So this is pretty useful. So OAST request handlers are triggered whenever an out-of-band service receives an interaction. So these request handlers are nothing but functions that do something. So you can do anything you want to do with them. So here's a JavaScript function and a JavaScript script in ZAP, and in that we have a function called request handler, which and all it's doing is it's printing the source, referrer, handler, the request header and body, all that information that's available in the GUI. So this is the important line here, which is the add OAST request handler method, which takes the function as a parameter, and this will be called whenever an out-of-band request is received. Let's look at another demo. So here I've programmed an request handler. I've programmed a request handler to send updates to my channel on Discord whenever an out-of-band request is received. So I have Discord on the left here and ZAP on the right. I have a script here. The Discord notifier is registered, and I get a payload using another ZAP script. And I send a request to the payload URL using curl. And when I poll the service in ZAP, you can see that I have a bunch of messages available in the Discord channel on the left. Here are the future plans for the OAST add-on. We're going to be adding more scan rules, and contributions are always welcome. The API and the automation framework aren't supported right now, but we're going to add support so that you can configure the add-on using those if you want. And we're also going to planning to add, there's no timeline for this, a permanent database, which will allow you to keep polling a service across ZAP restarts. So let's say you injected a payload into a target, and you want to check if the service receives any interactions after a week. If you want to check after a week if it received any interactions, the permanent database will allow you to do that. We went over how you can write active scan rules that make use of OAST payloads, and how you can write your own scripts that do various actions when OAST interactions are received. You can find these slides, demo code, and additional resources at my website at the given URL. Thanks for listening, everyone. You should now be able to understand the various ZAP GUI elements that are added by the OAST add-on. You should be able to configure the OAST services in ZAP.
Awesome. Akshath, thank you so much for doing a super technical deep dive into OAST. I'm sure lots of people are confused. I have many questions. Let's dig into some of them. I'll start with an easy one for you. I know you've been busy working on the tests in OAST, and what kind of tests are you thinking about or working on next? What's kind of the future plans for OAST testing in ZAP?
You mean scan rules, right?
Yeah. Scan rules or other extensions to the OAST like testing framework, or like what are you thinking about? What are you and the core team thinking about for how this evolves and grows?
So there are a couple of scan rules, a couple of obvious out-of-band scan rules like SSRF that we still don't have in ZAP. So we're going to be adding those first, and like more out-of-band scan rules. And the next feature that we're thinking of about is the permanent database. So which I mentioned. So what the permanent database is going to allow you to do is, so let's say you inject a payload today, and the actual out-of-band vulnerability, the interaction is triggered a week later. So even if the service supports it, the out-of-band service, there's a high probability that your ZAP instances you're not planning to run that for that long, for a week.
Yeah.
So what the permanent database is going to allow ZAP to do is, uh, so it's going to save the details of uh, the payloads and where they were injected and the alerts and everything that it needs. And then when a different ZAP instance runs a week later in your CI/CD pipeline, maybe uh, it's going to look at the permanent database, and if it receives, and it's going to poll the service again, the out of band service which is hosted, and if it finds an interaction, and it's going to look at the permanent database and the out of band service, and if there's a match, it's going to raise an alert. So yeah, I mean, because sometimes these out of band vulnerabilities, they're not triggered immediately. They require manual interaction. So let's say you inject a payload that only affects admin only pages,
Mhm.
and an administrator doesn't open that page, let's say, until a month or a week later. So that's how long. That's what the permanent database will have. uh, these That's the main feature that I'm thinking of working on. But if you anyone in the community has any more ideas, then please feel free to shoot out.
Awesome. That brings up my second question. Some of the challenge. My second question was some of the challenges with some out of band tests are they could take a long time to propagate to sub services and get triggered and all that stuff. For people who are kind of starting on out of band testing, like in starting down that path, what do you think a decent amount of time, like a sane amount of time to wait for an alert to propagate is? Like, what's that? You don't probably start at a month, like wait a month for an alert to show up. What do you think is a good baseline for people to start?
uh, you mean to wait for an alert, or
Yeah. How long should people generally be waiting for an alert when they're using OS tests for the alert to show up? Is it an hour? Is it
uh,
10 minutes? Is it, those kinds of that kind of baseline question of like, how long do I got to leave Zap running for an alert to show up?
so that really depends on the application. But and it also depends on each scan rule. So some scan rules, like maybe stored XSS, stored cross-site scripting, uh, you may want to have a different, longer duration for them. And for other scan rules like SSRF, you can find out straight out. So, uh, but an average, so for now, ZAP does not support uh, like long, like payload alerts that will be raised after a long time, because it does not have a permanent database yet. So for now, I would suggest 10 to 15 minutes, and maybe once we have the permanent database and more scan rules, and we also have statistics now in ZAP, so uh, maybe may, we'll find that out later, I guess. But for
Yeah,
now, I guess I'll say, yeah.
fair enough. I think it's important to point out that some out of band security tests, like the log4j test, actually show up really quickly. So that
Yeah,
particular one is one that like fires almost instantly, whereas some other
yeah,
ones like
that's a good
stored
point.
XSS have to propagate down to subsystems and then pop in that application or panel or however it pops, right, for that to show up. And that could take, it depends on where you test, right, could take a week, could take a day, could take forever, especially if you're not logging your pre-production services, and that's where you're actually testing, right? If you're testing in CI/CD and the logs that are being generated out there aren't getting populated out to the regular systems that you're using in production, those things might not generate or fire an alert. So really good, really interesting stuff there. I'm curious. Someone actually asked and I think it was Venkat. Let's see. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Venkat. He's curious if there, or maybe it was somebody else. Sorry. Curious if you think SSRF will be available with OAST at some point. Server side
Yeah,
request forgery with OAST.
Yeah, it's like the most. I think it's the most basic scandal that could make use of the OS. I don't know why we didn't add it earlier. So what we need to do with SSRF is basically inject the OAST payloads everywhere, right, in all the fields that ZAP finds, and if any of those result in an interaction, that means it's an SSRF. We trick the server into sending a request, so that's server side request forgery. We trick the server into sending a request to a server that we own, so that we control.
Yeah. So, for example, the log4j vulnerability is SSRF, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect. So
Uh,
you can already do SSRF testing with OAST in ZAP.
hmm.
Awesome.
Yeah, we can. For now, you will have to do it manually. We don't have a scandal for that, but we can add that too.
Awesome. Do you know any other use cases, live use cases of using the OAST plugin or framework via the API?
So it does not have API support as of now. Uh, so we can't configure the OAS add-on using the API. We can configure it using the configuration file that ZAP has. Uh, yeah. So, or was the question about attacking APIs or
No, I
using
think
the
the
API
question
to?
was around, is there anybody out there using the API to make OAST work? I'm sure this one actually did come from Venkat, and I'm sure he wants to integrate that into his big service that we just talked about the first session of the day. So I'm pretty sure that's where that question's coming from. Um, any other ideas on people that are doing that today?
I don't think so.
All right, fair enough. Hey, we're all live. This is live. Hey, we're live. It's like Memorex over here. We're doing live Q&A. If you're in the Discord channel, OAST with Zap, please feel free to dump a question in there. We'll ask Akshath live, and you can get his live answer. Akshath, a lot of people were saying they would love to see a deep dive video on some of the OAST stuff or a live Friday hacking session. I've been doing live Friday hacking sessions. I think this one's a little above me, so maybe you could join one day and we could walk through this. Any thoughts on how to get a little bit more information out there about OAST and how to make that work, or where you could probably see those?
So I guess I've created a page on my website where I've listed all these resources and links to blog posts. I When I was getting started with OAST, when I was writing the add-on, I found Portseigur's blog posts to be very good because they have per collaborator. Uh, yeah, I mean, just Google your queries and you'll find a lot of stuff online.
Awesome.
And yeah, and I think if you look at the scripts that I showed in this presentation, and if you look at the scan rules that make use of host, you will start to get and once you start getting more comfortable with Java and the JavaScript scan rules, I would suggest go look directly at the code. That's the best way to learn.
Yeah, great. I know Simon put the link to your blog into the Zap or the Discord Q&A, or sorry, here we go. Simon put the link to your blog in the Discord OAST with Zap channel on the ZAPCon server. So you can check that out. I know there's a couple of blog posts out on ZAProxy.org that talk about that. And I believe there's a video that's linked from there that you were actually demoing in this session today. That is how to use OAST, and you can actually watch that more in depth and check out more of the OAST stuff. So zaproxy.org, ricecot.com, both of those things have more information about OAST. Let's see. Are there any academic resources available for exploring OAST, like a Juice Shop or DWVA? Fairly new to web application testing and have never explored it.
I'm not aware. I think Portsfigure has the Web Security Academy again. You could check those out. And I think someone from StackHop also shared a demo app in the Discord channel. I'm
Yes,
not
I
aware of.
did share. I did share a. There's a demo app that has. Yeah, there's a demo app out there that has Log4Shell vulnerability in it. It's one of the ones we use at Stackhawk to do some testing and stuff. It has Log4j vulnerability in it and a few others, so it's not as crazy as OWASP Juice Shop, and it's actually a little bit easier to scan. So there's like lots of really good stuff in there you can test, and you can actually test that OAST Log4Shell vulnerability in that particular app. So that's one of them that's out there, and I'm sure Juice Shop and DVWA and whatever else will probably get some more examples of that as well.
Yeah,
All right, just scan
DVWA. Sorry, DVWA has a stored XSS vulnerability, I think. But yeah, there must be several of those apps.
Awesome. Somebody asked, is there a way to see request headers for OAST like in Burp Collaborator?
Yeah, so whenever any interactions show up in the OAST panel, you click on any of those interactions and the request headers along with the response headers and the bodies as well. They're all going to show up in the regular request and response body tabs. So yes,
right,
the
cool.
answer
So
to that question is yes.
You can definitely see them. They show up in the request response tabs in ZAP.
Yeah.
Awesome. I wonder what I can find on Hack the Box. That's a great question. Hack the Box could be an interesting place to play as well. Akshath, I think that's it for our questions right now. Any other final thoughts or plugs you want to add here for ZAP or whatever?
I don't think so.
No.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you bet. We're so glad to have you as a core contributor and presenting some of this content. I know you've been working hard on the OAST plugin. So from the ZAP community, thank you so much for adding such value to the plugin there. We'll let you go, Akshath, and thank you again.
Thanks, Scott. Bye.